Omoyele Sowore expressed frustration that the Department of State Services (DSS) once again prevented him from entering the courtroom to witness Nnamdi Kanu's trial, despite his consistent efforts to be present and support justice. He reminded the public that he had warned the authorities from the beginning that Nnamdi Kanu's abduction from Kenya and the charges brought against him would eventually collapse because they had no legal foundation. Omoyele Sowore argued that the entire case was built on political malice and a deliberate attempt to suppress a section of Nigerian people, particularly targeting Nnamdi Kanu, a Nigerian British citizen who was denied due process and a fair trial. He criticized the Nigerian government's oppressive tactics, such as the DSS's roadblocks around the court, stating that they are now tired and unable to fully block access, symbolizing the weakening of their efforts. Omoyele Sowore mentioned that the legal team's decision to file a no-case submission was expected, but he personally believes that the case never existed in the first place and should not have gone to court at all. He praised Nnamdi Kanu's lawyers and supporters for their courage and emphasized that his own support for Nnamdi Kanu is not political, but based on principle and the quest for justice and freedom. Omoyele Sowore stressed that Nigeria cannot become a unified and peaceful nation unless there is justice for all, and condemned the selective oppression of specific regions and peoples. He acknowledged that Nnamdi Kanu had long warned about the violence of Fulani herdsmen, especially their killing sprees across Nigeria, including in the southeast, Enugu, Edo and Kogi states, saying that these warnings now appear prophetic. Omoyele Sowore shared a personal anecdote that in 2019, the Nigerian government secretly charged him alongside Nnamdi Kanu in a case involving alleged plans to kill policemen, which never went to trial, further proving the political nature of these charges. He concluded with confidence that Nnamdi Kanu would soon be released and rejoin his supporters, reaffirming that the government's case is collapsing and the truth is finally being acknowledged by many who were previously skeptical. It was another tense morning in the heart of Abuja, the Federal Capital Territory of Nigeria. Security operatives stood alert, court attendees whispered anxiously, and the heat in the air seemed heavier than usual, not from the sun, but from the tension of expectation. In the middle of this atmosphere, Omoyele Sowore, a man who has spent years fighting for democratic rights and freedoms in Nigeria, stood at the entrance of the Federal High Court, his brows furrowed in visible frustration. Once again, the officers of the Department of State Services had denied him access to the courtroom, barring him from witnessing the trial of Mazi Nnamdi Kanu, the leader of the indigenous people of Biafra. Omoyele Sowore was not surprised, though the disappointment never lessened. It had happened many times before. Each time he arrived at the court to show his solidarity with Nnamdi Kanu and demand a transparent judicial process, agents of the Nigerian state blocked his path. What puzzled many observers was why a man who is not a member of the indigenous people of Biafra, who leads no secessionist group, and who had in the past contested for Nigeria's presidency, would place himself so firmly in support of a man the Nigerian government labeled a terrorist. But for Omoyele Sowore, it was never about ethnicity or political alignment. It was about justice. It was about principle. He spoke to the press gathered outside the courthouse, the cameras capturing his words as he began to explain, again, why he was there. Why he believed the Nigerian government had no real case against Nnamdi Kanu, and why he considered the entire process a farce born out of political malice. He recalled the very beginning, when the news broke in mid-2021 that Nnamdi Kanu had been abducted from Nairobi, the capital city of Kenya, under circumstances that violated international law and diplomatic protocol. It was not an extradition. It was a covert operation that many international human rights groups would later condemn as an illegal, extraordinary rendition. Omoyele Sowore had been one of the first public figures to raise alarm over that operation. He had warned then that such actions would not stand in the face of justice and that the charges would collapse under scrutiny. That day, standing behind a barricade of black uniformed operatives, he repeated the same belief, only this time more vindicated than ever. What he saw unfolding, he said, was not a trial grounded in law. It was the slow unraveling of a politically motivated case designed to silence dissent and suppress a growing demand for self-determination among the Igbo people of southeastern Nigeria. As he addressed the gathering crowd, Omoyele Sowore's voice carried conviction, not emotion. He did not shout. He was calm, measured, and clear. He explained how the Nigerian authorities had tried to paint Nnamdi Kanu as a dangerous man who posed a threat to national security. But the real threat, he said, was not Nnamdi Kanu. It was the refusal of the Nigerian government to address the deep-rooted injustices that had plagued the country for decades. He said that a government that continuously uses armed operatives to block peaceful court observers, that fabricates charges, and that detains people without trial was not defending justice. It was running from it. According to Omoyele Sowore, the security barricades themselves had become symbolic. He noticed that over time, the once tight cordons around the courthouse were no longer as impenetrable as before. More people had managed to slip through. More reporters had managed to get their equipment inside. It was a sign, he said, that the state apparatus was growing tired, that its effort to suppress the truth was losing momentum. The truth, Omoyele Sowore said, has a way of rising to the surface, no matter how much it is buried under propaganda. He expressed satisfaction that the legal team representing Nnamdi Kanu had moved to file a no-case submission, a legal declaration that the prosecution had failed to present any evidence worthy of defense. For Omoyele Sowore, that step was long overdue. In his view, there was never a case to begin with. It was a ghost trial, he said, built on empty allegations and baseless security theories. Yet despite its hollowness, it had caused immense suffering to Nnamdi Kanu and his followers. Omoyele Sowore did not limit his words to legal analysis. He shared the deep, personal reasons behind his solidarity with Nnamdi Kanu. Many had assumed his support was political, that he was seeking relevance or trying to capitalize on the emotional support the Biafran cause enjoyed in the southeastern region. But Omoyele Sowore insisted that his support was moral and principled. It stemmed from a belief that justice must apply equally to all citizens, regardless of ethnicity or political beliefs. He reminded his listeners that true freedom could not exist in a country where laws are enforced selectively and where justice bends to the will of the powerful. He also reminded the press that Nigeria is a federation made up of many ethnic groups, languages, and traditions. Without justice, he said, this diversity would always breed suspicion and resentment. Unity cannot be forced through military power or security operatives. It must be built on fairness, equity, and respect. In his view, the persecution of Nnamdi Kanu was a glaring example of how the Nigerian state had failed to uphold these values, and until that changed, peace would remain elusive. Omoyele Sowore then turned to something more striking, something many had begun to say in hushed tones, the prophetic nature of Nnamdi Kanu's past warnings. Years before the government labeled him a terrorist, Nnamdi Kanu had made speeches warning Nigerians about the rising threat of armed Fulani herdsmen, a group that had been accused of carrying out deadly attacks in rural communities across the country. At the time, many dismissed those warnings as exaggeration. But over the years, those warnings became reality. From Benue to Enugu, from Edo to Kogi, communities had been burned, families displaced, and farmers killed. Now, even critics of the Biafran movement were acknowledging that Nnamdi Kanu had seen something others refused to see. For Omoyele Sowore, this made him more than just a political activist. It made him a visionary. He stopped short of calling him a messiah, but admitted that there was something undeniably prophetic about his foresight. He asked the gathered reporters and observers to consider this. What kind of justice system jails a man for sounding an alarm that later proves to be accurate? He also shared a lesser-known story, something that added another layer to his personal connection to the case. Back in 2019, while he was still under heavy surveillance following his own arrest for organizing nationwide protests, the Nigerian government had filed a secret case that included both his name and that of Nnamdi Kanu. The accusation? A supposed plot to kill policemen. It was an absurd allegation, he said, and the case never saw the light of a courtroom. But to him, it was yet another indication of how the Nigerian state wielded accusations like weapons, not for justice, but for silencing those who dared to speak. It was at that point in his address that Omoyele Sowore's tone shifted from analysis to determination. He said with unwavering confidence that Nnamdi Kanu would soon be released. He did not know the exact date, but he believed it was close. He believed that the walls of deceit were cracking, that even within the corridors of power, there were now quiet conversations acknowledging the truth of what had happened. He urged Nigerians to continue demanding transparency and justice, not just for Nnamdi Kanu, but for all those who had been wrongfully accused, detained, or silenced. He emphasized that this was not about the ideology of Biafra, nor about secession. It was about the right of every citizen to speak, to organize, and to be heard. And most importantly, it was about holding the state accountable when it oversteps its bounds. Throughout the day, videos of Omoyele Sowore's speech circulated online. Social media platforms lit up with conversations about his words. Some praised his courage, others debated his views, but no one could deny the clarity of his message. This was not a man campaigning for office. This was not a man seeking political favor. This was a man standing on the side of justice, as he had always done, even when it cost him his freedom. As the sun began to descend and the crowd outside the court slowly dispersed, the echoes of Omoyele Sowore's words lingered in the air. In the quiet, you could still feel the weight of the day, the unresolved pain of a broken system, the stubborn hope of a people still waiting for justice, and the unmistakable sense that something was changing. It may not have been the kind of change that comes with fanfare or dramatic declarations, but it was the kind of change that grows quietly, like a seed taking root beneath the surface. A change built not on the noise of propaganda, but on the quiet courage of those who refuse to be silenced. And as long as voices like Omoyele Sowore's continue to speak, and as long as the truth continues to find its way through the cracks, the day Nnamdi Kanu walks free may not be far away. Because in the end, no matter how long injustice lasts, it cannot outlive the truth. As the voices of support for Mazi Nnamdi Kanu continued to grow louder and more confident outside the Federal High Court in Abuja, the scene was gradually transforming from just another legal proceeding into something deeper. An unfolding chapter in Nigeria's long and painful struggle between power and justice. Omoyele Sowore had left his words hanging in the air like incense, honest, persistent, and charged with the emotion of a man who had walked the road of state oppression himself. The atmosphere was electric, not just because of the presence of police officers and barricades, but because a new energy was taking hold. Something was shifting in public consciousness. Inside the courtroom, where journalists, international observers, and a limited number of family members were allowed, the space felt like a place of reckoning. Mazi Nnamdi Kanu sat with remarkable composure, dressed in his usual white outfit that had become a symbol of both innocence and quiet resistance. His eyes often scanned the room, locking with those who came to support him. Though surrounded by guards, he looked more like a symbol of resistance than a man awaiting trial. The courtroom had slowly become his pulpit, his stage, and his battlefield all at once. Every word uttered during the proceedings carried the weight of history. The legal team representing Mazi Nnamdi Kanu, led by some of the most tenacious human rights lawyers in Nigeria, had just submitted the no-case submission, a powerful legal argument that challenged the very foundation of the prosecution's claims. Their position was simple. The prosecution had failed to establish any credible evidence linking Mazi Nnamdi Kanu to the charges. They argued that what the Nigerian government was doing was not prosecution, but persecution. The judge, who had been under immense pressure from the political class, the public, and international observers, listened carefully. His face remained unreadable, but his body language betrayed a man carrying a burden larger than any single courtroom decision. The case had gone far beyond legal arguments. It had entered the realm of morality, history, and the global human rights community. Outside the court, Omoyele Sowore was not alone. Many others had come, not just from southeastern Nigeria, but from all over the country. There were Yoruba elders from Ondo State. There were Christian leaders from Plateau State. There were even Hausa Fulani youths who had come not because they believed in the Biafran cause, but because they believed in justice. It was a rare sight in Nigeria, where ethnic divisions are often used by political elites to sow fear and disunity. But that day, unity was being forged not through political slogans, but through shared outrage. One elderly man from Ebonyi State, who had traveled all the way to Abuja, said softly to a journalist that he had never believed in protests before. But something in him changed when he saw how Nnamdi Kanu had warned about Fulani herdsman violence long before the country took it seriously. His community had suffered attacks, and many of his relatives had been displaced. He felt that the government owed Mazi Nnamdi Kanu an apology, not a trial. Many people on social media began referring to Nnamdi Kanu as the prophet in chains. The phrase began trending not just in Nigeria, but in parts of the United Kingdom, Canada, and Germany, where the Biafran diaspora communities had been very active in raising awareness. Videos of Omoyele Sowore's statement went viral. In one of those clips, he looked directly into the camera and said, "History will judge all of us. If you are silent now, you will not be able to explain yourself to your children tomorrow." What made his words resonate so deeply was not just the truth in them, but the personal history behind them. Omoyele Sowore was not speaking from a place of comfort. He himself had been arrested, detained, brutalized, and placed under surveillance. He knew what it meant to have your life turned upside down for speaking out. His support for Mazi Nnamdi Kanu was not theoretical. It was grounded in lived experience. And so, when he called out the Nigerian government for using the courts to settle political scores, people listened. He explained in another interview how the Nigerian state uses fear as a political tool, how they detain, delay, and frustrate legal processes, not because they have evidence, but because they want to wear down the will of those who resist them. He described it as psychological warfare. Every delay in court, every roadblock set up by the Department of State Services, every denial of access to journalists or supporters was part of a broader plan to break down the spirit of resistance. But he pointed out that it was not working, Not on Mazi Nnamdi Kanu, not on his lawyers, and not on the thousands of Nigerians who kept showing up outside the court, chanting, singing, and praying for justice. He said the case was becoming an embarrassment for the government, not just within Nigeria, but internationally. The African Union had raised concerns. Members of the United States Congress had written letters. British lawmakers were demanding answers. Even within the Commonwealth, the case was now being discussed as a potential violation of international legal standards. Omoyele Sowore urged the Nigerian media to do better, to stop repeating government propaganda, and to start asking hard questions. He challenged them to investigate the legal basis of the charges, to follow the money trails, to speak to communities affected by the Fulani herdsman attacks that Mazi Nnamdi Kanu had spoken about long ago. He reminded them that journalism is not about echoing power, but about holding it accountable.
Very excited to be here as always, even though, as usual, the DSS prevented me from entering the courtroom. But I'm a living witness to history. The first time Mazi was abducted from Kenya and brought here, I was in court to warn them that, in fact, I was one of the few people that came here as soon as they did their kangaroo arraignment, that this case is not going anywhere, and that there's no way, it doesn't matter how long it takes, it's going to end up the way it started, as nothing, and it will end up as nothing, because there's nothing that can stand up on nothing. The foundation of this was malice. It was the suppression of a section of Nigerian people and the violation of the fundamental right of a Nigerian British citizen who was abducted from another country, brought here without due process, and detained indefinitely, even presented from having open and fair trial, which we have seen all over the time. As a matter of fact, today we already had an altercation with the DSS, preventing people from moving around here. But you know, they started by blocking everywhere. Now they are tired, they can't even block half of the road, because you cannot stop an idea whose time has come. And this is what we have won them. And I'm glad that they are reaching the dead end that we have predicted. The dead end is that there will be a no case submission. In fact, I would have an issue with the lawyers if I were to be involved, because there's no need to even file a no case submission in a case that never existed in the first place. But you have to do your own legal work. And let me use this opportunity to also appreciate all the lawyers and all the people who have stood in solidarity with Nnamdi Kanu. I said it that if I'm the last person that will stand with him, I will stand with him. And mine is not political. Yes. In fact, the most unpopular political decision to take in Nigeria is to stand with Nnamdi Kanu. So if you want to win election, you know who to stand with, which is the federal government. Yes. But I'm not doing this to win election. I'm doing it for the freedom of our people everywhere we might find ourselves. And I believe that if Nigeria is going to become one, it has to be on the basis of justice. You cannot be suppressing a section just as the rest will flourish and think that you can go home to rest. And you have seen it now. Even those people who never believed Nnamdi Kanu a few years ago, they have seen it with what the Fulani herdsmen are doing, killing hundreds of people. They are doing it also in the southeast. They killed in Ebonyi, they killed in Enugu, they are killing in Edo, they are killing in Kogi, they are killing people across the country. Imo, yes, there was some killing. So this was what Nnamdi Kanu told you as a prophet. But he has always told me, when I met him in New York, that he's not a prophet. He's just saying the reality of what the Nigerian project is all about. That it was a fake project put together and it can never materialize until there is justice. And this is what we keep advising them. The interesting thing was that there was even a time in 2019 that they charged me secretly with him. I filed a charge here that I connived with him to kill some policemen. So the case never came to trial, and it will never be. So we can't wait to see Nnamdi Kanu rejoin all of us. And I'm very certain that will happen. It's just a matter of time. And it doesn't matter how long they do their case, which I never believed in that way. It has come to a situation where everybody has come to the understanding that there was no case, and the case will finally fall apart officially very soon. Thank you guys very much.
This is the end of our news update. Please click the icon on the top right corner of your screen to watch my next video. You will enjoy it. I will see you again in my next update. Enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye for now.